Hello, Recy. We're with Recy Dunn, CEO of Ascend Public Charter Schools. Welcome to CEOs You Should Know.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We're excited to have you in as well. So, Recy, as CEO of Ascend Public Charter Schools, you oversee a network educating students from kindergarten through the 12th grade, schools that are dedicated to providing rich and joyful learning experience. Can you tell me more about what inspires you to lead that initiative and how, as CEO, you're leading that vision for the Brooklyn community?
Yeah, this is a great question. I have been privileged to be in this role for the last 4 years. I was in the New York City public schools before that. I live in Brooklyn,
Yeah.
and my wife's from Brooklyn. My kids think they're from Brooklyn. So originally, when I looked at the opportunity to lead Ascend, it was really seeing there was kids that looked like me. So there was an opportunity to serve heavily Black and brown population throughout Brooklyn. We had started in Brownsville almost 16 years ago. And when I saw that and saw the communities, this is the communities that I wanted to be a part of, that is originally what attracted me. The other part was just thinking about how can we serve kids in these communities that historically we have failed to serve well with education, especially.
Yeah.
And that drew me into thinking about what could Ascend be. And that's really how I first got to Ascend. And I'm happy to talk about kind of what we've done kind of since then as after I got there.
Yeah. Before we get into what you've done since you've gotten there, it sounds like your background has almost all the years has been in education.
I was
And
a career switcher like early on in my career. Yeah, I was in finance for 2 seconds.
but education really is your passion.
Absolutely.
And in various other education institutions such as New Leaders, Prince George's County Public Schools, District Columbia Public Schools, it's probably shaped your vision for, how you want to approach leadership in the CEO role. But I guess how have you innovated yourself from prior Recy to Recy CEO of Ascend Public Charter Schools?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think context matters tons. So understanding the needs of Brooklyn and the schools in Brooklyn, I think is one thing I've had to think about more deeply. I've had the opportunity to work in DC and Maryland, but also in Houston, and also in the New York City schools. I think the other thing is just size. We are 17 schools currently. We serve a little under 6,000 students. So thinking about what do those communities need and what does that look like is very different than the New York City public schools, which is much larger.
Yeah.
I think the things that I have adapted, part of it is like my own growth. Like my kids have gone through the public school system. One's now about to be a senior in high school.
Great.
And one's a college, just finished being a college freshman. So I think being a dad has definitely influenced how I lead
Hmm.
and thinking about are these schools I would send my kids to. And so I think that's definitely been with me throughout my trajectory as a leader. But I think good schools are good schools. Like, schools are schools all over the country. And I think, how we work with kids each and every day, how important it is to have a great teacher in front of kids. I think that's like a universal truth all over the place.
Right. It sounds like the heartbeat of Ascend really is about the Brooklyn community and super serving the people of Brooklyn. You had mentioned commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism. Can you share some specific instances, strategies, initiatives that Ascend has implemented to uphold those principles and ensure that all students feel value and supported?
Absolutely. So this is another major reason that attracted me to Ascend. Ascend had this commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism. And when I was first looking at joining, the opportunity to make it really part of who we are and really part of the ethos and how we move, the board and the org was ready for it. And so that's something I've loved to be a part of and lead since I've been there. The way we do it, one thing is I think doing this well, it's messy.
Yeah.
I think it means not just having representation, which we've worked up very hard to have a very diverse staff, but it also means how do we think about our policies? How do we think about how do we talk to families? How do we think about accessibility to our buildings? How do we think about, the calendar? Like these are all things we think about when we kind of think about DEIA and how it's sort of a lens with which we look at all the work, and we want to do it in service of the students that are in front of us every day. So some of the examples have been we have stipended roles at our schools for DEI champions, essentially, to turnkey some of the work that's happening nationally, and make it come to life in the school.
Yep.
The other thing we've done is we've hired a practitioner who works for the network team, who works with those school leaders to do some of that work. And the other thing is just always having this lens when we're looking at policies to think about what's possible and like what are the things we need to change, and also like asking ourselves. We use it when we interview staff,
Yep.
and we use it when we're thinking about what's right for kids.
Yeah, that was going to be a follow-up question. You had mentioned the board, you had mentioned your faculty. With nearly 80% of your staff identifying as people of color, it must be a big belief that diverse representation for the faculty and staff ensures and gives the nutrients for the students, I would think.
1,000%. And I think knowing, especially in the communities that we're in, when kids and parents can come in and see teachers that look like them or maybe from the same background, that definitely goes a long way in just seeing the identity like themselves in front and making those relationships
Yep.
with kids and parents. I think that goes a long way. And then also just thinking about, as we roll out curriculum and as we think about literacy, thinking
Right.
about like, who are the authors, what are the subject matters, what is the representation folks are seeing. We're
Yep.
always thinking about that in our schools.
That's great. That's great. I wanted to dive a little bit deeper about Ascend Public Charter Schools' commitment to growing and expanding. What are some key goals and initiatives you're aiming to achieve this year and maybe in the next couple of years?
Yeah, we right now are committed to organic growth. So we opened 4 new lower schools right before the pandemic. Those schools have grown out, and we're at the point where we want to transition them into new school buildings for middle school. And so we are excited that we're opening 2 brand new buildings this summer for those middle schools. And so having the opportunity for those students who are currently incubating in other schools to come to the new middle schools, which are going to be amazing buildings, both in the kind of Cypress Hills and East New York area, but
Yep.
also in the Flatbush area. And we're excited for the families and communities just to open up a new building. And so those are 2 things we're
That's
doing
great.
to commit to that growth for the next few years. So that's one big part of our growth right now. The other part is making sure that the schools and communities that we're in, we want to continue to provide opportunities for students where we have space. And so I think we're continuing to do some of that work in East New York and Cypress Hills, but also in Flatbush as well.
Right. That's excellent. Can you share success stories or notable achievements of students or alumni from Ascend Public Charter Schools that demonstrate the impact of the school's educational approach?
Yeah, so we're 16 years old.
16 years.
We only have
And
one.
how many years have you been?
I've been there. This is my 4th year.
4th year as CEO?
as CEO.
That's
correct.
great.
We only have one high school.
Yeah.
So we've only had, I think we've had 6 or 7 graduating classes so far. I think this is a place where we still need to get better as we've grown. We've definitely focused a lot on K-8 over our lifetime. We're continuing to think about what could make our high school better,
Right.
and how can we provide opportunities for our alums. So I think some of our alums, we see our alums both as folks who have left our K-8 and gone on to like amazing other schools, but also kids who have gone with us all the way through 12th and then have gone on to college. I think we think of this as not just a college option, but we really think about boundless choice. And one of the pivots we made a few years ago was thinking about we want to educate kids and serve them well and ensure that they can live lives of boundless choice. And that choice may mean college, but it may mean some other pathway. That could be an apprenticeship. That could be some other career and technical field. It could be military.
Right.
So those are other places that we're thinking about. And so that's some of the work we're going to continue to do at the high school level to think about what could they do after high school.
Wow. So support for the students, even outside of Ascend Public Charter
Yeah,
Schools.
that's our hope.
Yeah.
I think there's still some work we need to do, and I think running high schools is difficult. But that's some of the resources and focus we're looking at for the next couple of years as well.
That's great. That's amazing support for the children, and certainly some big goals that I think Ascend can accomplish under your leadership. Let's talk about leadership and specifically with your faculty. Now that we've kind of talked about the kids,
Sure.
Ascend Public Charter Schools fosters a culture of continuous improvement and professional development. Can you share how you encourage the faculty to really embrace the fact that they're there for a reason to develop themselves as educators?
Yeah, one thing we've always embraced is continuous improvement. We've gone through our own changes over time. How we were founded is different than how we are today, and I think some of that's been changing with the times, the community, our approach to how we think about how we talk to kids, our discipline approach. We run a restored, or basically something called responsive classrooms, where we get to know our kids well, really think about the words we're using with kids. And that was a big shift we made several years ago,
Right.
and I think that's been fantastic. I think the other part, when we think about our faculty and the things they need, one is resources. So when I first got there, a number of our staff said that they needed better curricular resources, especially post-pandemic.
Yep.
And so one thing we've been able to do this past year, we were able to invest in new curriculum, K-12, especially in humanities, English language arts, and math. With that, we know we can't just drop off new curriculum. We knew that they needed some professional development to go with that. So that was making sure we could provide not just materials, but also opportunities for them to learn. So some of that was during the summer. So last year we had a literacy institute just to focus on the science of reading and think about literacy essentially as a civil right, and why it's so important to be in front of kids and focus on reading and writing and problem solving. But then also, how do they have the support to do that?
Right.
And I think that's an area we could still invest more in. And one of our big pillars for next year is making sure we're providing new teacher development, because we have a lot of staff who are either new to the profession or new to teaching or first job potentially. So I think there's a lot of work we could do to think about what are skills that how can we support them, either
Right.
through our assistant principals, our network team, our principals. So that's some of the work we're committed to doing as well, to ensure people can grow with us as well.
That's amazing, and you speak with a lot of conviction and passion for your staff. You sound like a CEO that people would want to work for. So
Sometimes, I hope so. I always tell people I want this place to be a dope place to work. Like, we
Yeah.
all know what it's like to work at places that suck, right?
Yeah.
Like, so let's not emulate that.
Yeah.
Like, let's come together and think about how do we create the environment that we want to be at, and how do we think about, and we're doing this on behalf of kids. Like, we don't have to be a stuffy bureaucracy. We can think about, if we're focused on, a high bar for education, and we're focused on getting to know our kids and communities well, and we're focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism, we can do those things.
right.
And like, wouldn't that be dope if we could do it together and
Right.
have a good place to be as well and grow? And
It's
I think
the ultimate culture.
let's do it.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's not perfect. We have not like fully, realized this,
Yeah.
but and like everywhere we have our own warts, and I think it's work that we continue to do to try to get better.
Right. Speaking of not always perfect, and I'm sure within your industry, there's many challenges. Can you speak to us about challenges that educational institutions, particularly charter schools, are facing today?
Mhm. I think in New York City, everybody's facing concerns about enrollment. So I think that's
Yep.
been something definitely post-pandemic, where this is not just charters, but charters and the traditional school system have seen, and even private schools have seen, issues with enrollment, either people moving or gentrification or the migrant influx as well. I think there's been a lot of like movement patterns of population, and trying to think about how do we work, especially in a choice environment where every parent can choose what's right for their kid.
Right. Yep.
So I think that's, how do you tell your story and tell how your school is a different offering and right for your kid versus some other school. So that's been a big one. I think the other piece is funding.
Yeah.
Like we get funded largely on public dollars. Students who enroll, we receive funding for those students. However, our funding is not one-to-one with what a traditional school system receives, especially when it comes to facilities. And so that's an area we're continuing to think about. How do we get funding that's level and that we can then invest in our school buildings, but also our program, and ensuring all the kids have what they need in front of them.
I knew funding would come up,
There
of course.
you go.
So thinking about some of the challenges that you've just kind of addressed, what kind of advice would you give other educators, administrators, maybe here in New York City, or maybe, back from where you started
Yeah.
in Texas, about challenges for their respective institutions, especially regarding the maintaining focus on student development, community engagement, what you're doing here in Brooklyn? What
Mhm.
advice would you give to other educators, again, here in New York, or maybe even outside?
Yeah, I think, and another, you made me think of another one, and obviously talent. Talent is always going to be an issue. I know
course,
we talked a little bit about that, but maintaining the war for talent is huge. Having a teacher or staff in front of a student makes all the difference. So I think thinking and adults have choices, especially post pandemic. Folks have choices in when and how they work, and many of our schools are still 5 days a week. So trying to make sure people want to do that. The advice I would say is, I often try to take the long view, right? Like, what can we change over time? How can we think about systemic change, not just the incremental change? So I often think about, if you came to my office, you would see like probably a whiteboard that has like world peace up in the corner, and there'd be like a list of all the things that probably are going to be world peace. But those are things that I don't think I'm going to achieve in the next 10 years. But it becomes noise. So everybody wants to change all the things. So I'm often advising people and leaders to think about, get that out of your head. Let's focus on what we can do right now. What can be fundamentally change the work, the lives of kids, and what are the things we can put in place? Let's focus on that now. If we knock those things out, we can pull things over from our world peace column to think about then tackling those one at a time. So play the long game. I think that's one thing I would definitely do. And I think the other thing is that, I think I often am asking people to challenge the paradigm of like, what it is we're doing. We've been running schools the same way for like hundreds of years, and like we don't have to. And so I think, what are the things that we can change to make sure we're providing a fantastic education for families? And like, let's do it. Like, and there are things we can do in how we serve kids, what we teach, how we teach. Those are all things. How we leverage technology. Those are all things we can change. And I think, but people often have their own mental model of like, it has to be this way. It has to be a teacher in front. It has to be 30 kids. It doesn't have to be that way. Like, we can tweak around and be a little bit more innovative as well. And I think it's time we should as well.
Yeah. And you live and breathe in the same communities that the kids are that you're educating. Do you feel like it's important to have that sense of community, to maybe be from the area that you are responsible for?
I think it helps me. I don't know that it's like the right thing for everybody, right? Not everybody can do it. I think it helps me working and living in Brooklyn. It's fantastic. I think it helps me understand a little bit more on what's going on in our schools and our communities. I think you can work in other places, but I think there's something to being closer to your schools that can be right. It's not for everybody, and not everybody has the privilege to do it. But I think for me, it helps me be more effective, and I think it helps. We have a lot of staff who live near some of our buildings as well. I think it helps them as well.
Before we wrap up, tell me, something that your best friend would tell us about you. Maybe something that your students and faculty don't know that you want to share.
That they don't know? Oh my God. I love food. I also love to cook.
Oh, that's great.
So I think I enjoy that immensely, spending time with my family cooking. My wife and I take long walks. I don't think people see me as like a walker, but like I do that as well. And I am a sucker for like ice cream and cookies any day. So those are some passions outside of work, I think people don't know. What else? The other thing is, like, I don't think people know, like, I grew up in Texas. I grew up playing high school football. I did like all the traditional Friday night lights, all that good stuff. That was a big part of my life growing up. And in college, I ended up playing rugby. So I think people don't know that part about me. But I think that team sports environment definitely helps shape a lot of kind of like how I think about teams, how I think about winning, how I think about like discipline. That definitely influenced me as well.
Those were the two words I was thinking as you mentioned that: winning and discipline, and certainly giving you making you into who you are today. If you weren't an educator, what would you be doing?
Hopefully I'd be a DJ running a coffee shop
at iHeartMedia
on the beach, whenever y'all want to open like the Hawaii station. Like, I'm happy to, like, that would be probably something I would do. That would probably be something I would do. I think, I didn't initially, education was not my first career. So I definitely stumbled into it, but I think since I've been in it, I've loved it, all since. And I think it's like ended up being, part of my calling and my path. Once I got in.
Yeah, that's amazing. You can definitely tell with our discussion today. What do the kids call you, Mr. Dunn?
Often Mr. Dunn. Sometimes they don't all know, depending on the age, they don't all know what a CEO is, right? So like sometimes they think I'm the owner. I'm like, I'm not the owner. But they'll ask all the questions, right? They're like they'll ask like, how much do you make, and and where do you live, and are you running this? So I think like it's hilarious, but it's great to also look like many of my kids and show up and tell them like,
Yeah.
yes, this is the work I'm doing and I'm leading this organization. I think that's important too, both
Yep.
for our kids and our families.
Yeah. Sounds like my kids asking me the same questions. Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you today on CEOs You Should Know. I did have a final question, if you're open to it.
Sure.
What message would you like to convey to parents, students, the wider community about the mission and values for Ascend Public Charter Schools? I guess moving into the future, if you leave our listeners with a final thought.
Yeah. I think the things I would say about Ascend specifically is that, look, Ascend is in Brooklyn. We want to be Brooklyn's school of choice. That's our goal in the future. Just the way you think of Brooklyn and you think of the Brooklyn Library, the Brooklyn Museum, the Brooklyn Nets, we want you to think about Ascend as well. So we want to be part of the community, and that's something that's very important to us, and we are proud to be in and of Brooklyn. That being said, we know that parents have choices, and I think wherever you send your kid, I think it's a responsibility of whoever is providing services that you ask the right questions to ensure that they're providing everything they can, and think your kids can achieve anything. And I think that's something that's the best thing I would say is just like making sure you're asking those questions, because I think it's it can fundamentally change the trajectory of kids' lives by their school experience. And that's something I'm excited that we get to do every day. And I hope that everybody else is excited to think about education in the same way.
That's great. Well, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
Recy, it's been a pleasure to get to know you a little bit.
I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you.